In the vast expanse of the Galactic Federation's most prestigious academy, where beings from 1,000 worlds compete for recognition and power, there exists an ancient truth that most have forgotten: the universe does not reveal its greatest secrets to those who demand them, but to those who quietly endure until the moment of awakening arrives. What happens when the most underestimated species in the galaxy carries within them a power so profound that it could reshape the very foundations of reality? What occurs when mockery transforms into terror, when laughter becomes silence, and when a simple human girl becomes the catalyst for an awakening that will shake the stars themselves? This is the story of Maya Chen, a human student whose quiet determination hid a legacy written in the fabric of space and time itself. A legacy that would transform her from the Academy's greatest joke into its most feared legend. The crystalline spires of the Celestial Academy pierced the purple sky of Nexus Prime like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns that bathed the campus in perpetual twilight. Maya Chen pressed her palm against the cool metal of the transport pod's window, watching as the most prestigious educational institution in the known galaxy grew larger before her eyes. Somewhere in her chest, a mixture of excitement and dread battled for dominance. The pod's automated voice chimed in perfect galactic standard. "Attention passenger. You are now approaching Celestial Academy, established in the year 2847 of the Galactic Standard Calendar. Please prepare for docking procedure." Maya adjusted the strap of her worn travel bag, her fingers unconsciously brushing against the strange birthmark on her left hand. The mark had always been there, a peculiar symbol that resembled intertwining spirals with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her grandmother had called it a blessing. Her parents had called it a curiosity. Maya had learned to call it an embarrassment, something to be hidden beneath gloves or long sleeves. The pod settled into its docking berth with a gentle thud, and the airlock hissed open. Maya stepped out onto the platform, immediately feeling the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon her. The other new arrivals were an impressive sight to behold. A towering Vorthak with 6 arms and crystalline skin that refracted light into rainbow patterns. A graceful selenite whose ethereal form seemed to float rather than walk. A group of Corvin younglings, their scaled hides shimmering with bioluminescent displays that indicated their emotional states. And then, there was Maya. 5 feet 4 inches of unremarkable human, with straight black hair, brown eyes, and the distinction of being the first human ever admitted to the Celestial Academy in its 800-year history. "Look at this," came a voice that dripped with amusement. Maya turned to see a tall, elegant figure approaching. This was Zephyr Kethtar, heir to one of the most powerful telepathic bloodlines in the Andorian Consortium. His skin held a faint blue luminescence, and his eyes were pools of liquid silver that seemed to see through everything they looked upon. The rumors were true. They actually admitted a human. Several other students gathered around, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. A mechanoid named Circuit Prime extended one of its sensor arrays toward Maya, scanning her with obvious disappointment. "Biological systems operating at baseline efficiency," it announced in a voice like grinding gears. "No apparent modifications or enhancements detected. How did this primitive specimen gain admission?" Perhaps as a charity case, suggested a flame dancer from the Pyros system, her body wreathed in harmless but intimidating fires. "The Academy does have programs for underdeveloped species, does it not?" Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "I scored in the 98th percentile on the entrance examinations," she said quietly. "Same as anyone else here." This statement was met with a round of laughter that echoed across the platform. Zephyr Kethtar smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too perfect. "The human entrance examinations, perhaps. But those are hardly comparable to the standards we maintain. Tell me, little human, can you move objects with your mind?" He gestured lazily, and Maya's travel bag lifted from her shoulder to hover in the air before her. "Can you manipulate quantum fields?" asked another student, a being that looked like living liquid mercury formed into a roughly humanoid shape. The air around Maya shimmered as microscopic particles rearranged themselves into complex geometric patterns. "Can you survive in the vacuum of space?" inquired a creature that appeared to be made entirely of interlocked crystal formations. "Can you process information at the speed of light? Can you exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously?" With each question, Maya felt herself shrinking inside. She had known this would be difficult, had prepared herself for the cultural barriers and the academic challenges. But she hadn't been ready for this level of casual cruelty, this assumption that her very presence was somehow insulting to the institution. "I can learn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The laughter that followed was worse than the questions had been. "Learn?" Zephyr's mental voice pressed into her thoughts without invitation, a violation that made her stagger slightly. "Little human, we have students here who were manipulating the fundamental forces of reality before they could walk. We have beings who communicate in mathematical equations that your species hasn't even discovered yet. We have prodigies who solve problems that would take your entire world centuries to comprehend. What could you possibly offer that we don't already possess in abundance?" Maya opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. What could she say? That she had always been good at puzzles? That she could see patterns where others couldn't? That something deep inside her seemed to resonate with the mathematical principles that governed the universe? It all seemed so small and insignificant compared to the casual display of power surrounding her. "Perhaps she's here to serve food in the cafeteria," suggested another voice, prompting fresh waves of laughter. "Or to clean the laboratories," added someone else. "I heard humans are excellent at menial labor," chimed in a third voice. "Very trainable, apparently." Maya's hand clenched into a fist at her side, and, for just a moment, the birthmark on her palm grew warm. But the sensation passed so quickly that she wondered if she had imagined it. "Come now," Zephyr said, his tone taking on a mock-sympathetic quality. "Don't look so distressed, little human. I'm sure you'll find your place here. Perhaps in the remedial classes with the other, less gifted students." He paused dramatically. "Oh, but, wait. There aren't any other students like you, are there? You're quite alone in your mediocrity." The crowd began to disperse as transportation pods arrived to ferry students to their dormitory assignments. Maya found herself standing alone on the platform, her bag at her feet where Zephyr had carelessly dropped it. The excitement she had felt during the journey had evaporated completely, replaced by a hollow sensation in her chest that threatened to overwhelm her. She picked up her bag and consulted the digital tablet that contained her room assignment. Dormitory Block 7, Room 247. As she made her way through the academy's corridors, she couldn't help but notice how the other students gave her a wide berth, as if her humanity might be contagious. Their conversations fell silent as she passed, only to resume in hushed whispers once they thought she was out of earshot. The dormitory building was a marvel of architecture that seemed to defy several laws of physics, with corridors that curved upward into impossible spirals and gravity fields that allowed students to walk on any surface they chose. Maya's room was small but comfortable, with a bed that could adjust to any species' physiological requirements and a desk equipped with a quantum computer capable of processing more information in a second than the entire human internet had contained when she was born. She set her bag on the bed and walked to the window, which offered a view of the academy's central courtyard. Below, she could see groups of students socializing, their alien forms creating a tapestry of shapes and colors that would have been impossible to imagine on Earth. Some were engaged in what appeared to be friendly competitions of power, creating miniature storms or reshaping matter with casual ease. Others floated in meditation circles, their consciousness visibly extending beyond their physical forms to touch the quantum substrate of reality itself. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. What had she been thinking? Her acceptance letter had arrived 6 months ago, delivered by a courier whose ship had materialized in her family's backyard on Earth in defiance of every physical law she thought she understood. The letter had been brief and formal, congratulating her on her acceptance to the Celestial Academy and providing basic information about travel arrangements and academic requirements. Her parents had been ecstatic. Their daughter, the first human ever accepted to study alongside the galaxy's greatest minds. The local news had picked up the story, and, for a brief time, Maya Chen had been the most famous person on Earth. The pressure had been enormous, but so had the excitement. She was going to learn secrets that no human had ever known, to walk among beings who could reshape reality with a thought. Now, standing in her small room with the memory of cruel laughter still echoing in her ears, that dream felt impossibly naive. A chime from her computer indicated that she had received a message. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the kind and weathered face of Professor Hendricks, the human physicist who had recommended her for the program. Maya, his recorded voice said, I hope your journey went well and that you're settling in comfortably at the academy. I know this won't be easy for you. You're breaking new ground, not just for yourself but for all of humanity. There will be those who doubt you, who question your right to be there. But remember what I told you during our last meeting. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most unexpected sources. Trust in your abilities, trust in your perspective, and trust in the fact that the universe has a way of revealing its secrets to those who approach it with genuine curiosity rather than arrogance. You're there for a reason, Maya. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The message ended, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. She looked down at her left hand, at the strange birthmark that had been with her since birth. In the academy's artificial lighting, the pattern seemed more distinct somehow, as if responding to her proximity to so much accumulated knowledge and power. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. That mark is special, Maya. It's been in our family for generations, passed down through the women of our line. Your great-great-grandmother had it, and her grandmother before her. We always knew it meant something, but we never knew what. Maya had always assumed it was just a family legend, the kind of story that gets embellished with each telling until it bears no resemblance to reality. But now, surrounded by beings who treated impossibility as a minor inconvenience, she found herself wondering if there might have been more truth to her grandmother's words than she had realized. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a maintenance droid hovering in the corridor, its mechanical appendages holding a stack of books and data tablets. Academic materials for student Maya Chen, the droid announced in a flat, synthetic voice. Required texts for Introduction to Quantum Mechanics, Principles of Dimensional Theory, Elementary Psychic Defense, Basic Energy Manipulation, and History of Galactic Civilizations. Please confirm receipt. Maya accepted the materials, staggering slightly under their weight. Confirmed, she said. The droid's sensors focused on her for a moment. Query: Are you certain these materials are correct? These appear to be advanced undergraduate texts, not remedial materials. The implication stung, but Maya forced herself to remain polite. They're correct, she said. Acknowledged. However, I feel obligated to inform you that these subjects typically require significant psychic or energy manipulation capabilities. If you lack these abilities, you may wish to consider auditing the courses rather than attempting full enrollment. Thank you for the advice, Maya said through gritted teeth. I'll manage. The droid sensors whirred for a few more seconds before it turned and glided away down the corridor. Maya closed the door and set the materials on her desk, opening the first textbook at random. The page was filled with mathematical equations that described the relationship between consciousness and quantum field fluctuations, concepts that pushed the boundaries of even her considerable mathematical knowledge. But, as she stared at the equations, something strange happened. The symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, forming patterns that her mind could suddenly grasp with startling clarity. It was as if someone had switched on a light in a dark room, revealing connections and relationships that had been hidden moments before. Maya blinked and shook her head, and the sensation passed. The equations returned to their normal appearance, complex and challenging but no longer mysteriously comprehensible. She must have been more tired from the journey than she had realized. She spent the next several hours reviewing the course materials, taking notes and trying to familiarize herself with concepts that most of the other students had probably been learning since childhood. The mathematics was challenging but not impossible, and she found herself making steady progress through the introductory chapters. As the artificial night cycle began and the academy's lighting dimmed to simulate evening, Maya prepared for her first day of classes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and almost certainly new forms of mockery from her fellow students. But, as she settled into bed, her left hand resting on the pillow beside her, the birthmark seemed to pulse with a faint warmth that followed the rhythm of her heartbeat. In her dreams that night, she saw vast spirals of stars and galaxies, mathematical equations written in fire across the void of space, and something vast and ancient stirring in response to her presence. She dreamed of symbols that matched the mark on her hand, carved into the walls of structures that predated the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. She dreamed of her ancestors, women who had carried the same mark and the same inexplicable sense that they were connected to something far greater than themselves. And, in the deepest part of the night, when the Academy's 3 suns had set and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, something in the quantum foundations of reality took notice of the small human girl who carried an ancient legacy in her blood and on her skin. The first day of classes would indeed bring challenges Maya could never have imagined. But they would not be the challenges she expected. Maya's first class was Introduction to Quantum Mechanics, held in a spherical chamber where gravity could be adjusted to allow students to sit on any surface. The professor, a being called Mentor Vexthal, appeared to be composed entirely of flowing mathematical equations that occasionally coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to ripple around its words. "Welcome, students, to the fundamental exploration of reality's building blocks," Mentor Vexthal intoned, its voice resonating on frequencies that Maya could feel in her bones. "Here you will learn to perceive the quantum substrate that underlies all existence, to manipulate probability clouds, and to dance with uncertainty itself." Maya had chosen a seat near the back of the chamber, hoping to avoid attention. Around her, the other students displayed casual mastery over forces that human science barely understood. A crystalline student was simultaneously taking notes on 7 different data tablets while its consciousness split to analyze multiple probability streams. The flame dancer from the previous day was literally burning equations into the air with precise applications of controlled plasma. "Today, we begin with a simple exercise," Mentor Vexthal announced. "Each of you will reach into the quantum foam and extract a single probability thread. Observe its potential outcomes, follow its branching paths, and report on what you discover." The professor's equation form shifted, and, suddenly, the air in the chamber filled with a visible representation of quantum probability fields. Maya gasped as she saw the fundamental structure of reality laid bare around her, threads of possibility stretching in every direction, each one representing potential futures branching and merging in an infinite dance of cause and effect. "Remember," Mentor Vexthal continued, "the quantum realm responds to conscious observation. Your mind becomes both telescope and scalpel. Reach out with your psychic awareness and gently grasp a single thread. Do not attempt to force or control, simply observe and learn." Around the chamber, students began extending their consciousness into the probability fields. Maya watched in fascination as mental tendrils of energy reached out from each student, glowing with the unique signature of their species' psychic development. The Andorian students' mental projections were silver and precisely controlled. The mechanoids interfaced directly with the quantum fields through their neural networks. The Selenites seemed to phase partially out of normal spacetime to interact with probability on a more fundamental level. Maya closed her eyes and tried to do what the others were doing. She had no formal training in psychic techniques, no natural telepathic abilities like so many of the other species. But she reached out anyway, using nothing but human intuition and determination. For long minutes, nothing happened. Around her, she could hear the excited murmurs of other students as they successfully grasped probability threads and began exploring their implications. Maya felt the familiar sting of inadequacy. Perhaps the maintenance droid had been right. Perhaps she should consider auditing rather than attempting full participation. Then, something remarkable happened. Instead of reaching out with psychic energy she didn't possess, Maya found herself simply understanding. The probability threads weren't separate from her, they were flowing through her, around her, connecting her to every other conscious being in the chamber and beyond. She didn't need to grasp a thread because she could see how all the threads wove together, creating patterns of stunning complexity and beauty. Without conscious effort, her left hand moved to rest on the quantum probability field, and the birthmark on her palm began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every probability thread in the chamber suddenly blazed with increased intensity, their patterns becoming clearer and more defined. The other students' mental projections grew stronger and more precise. Even Mentor Vexthal's equation form seemed to stabilize into a more coherent configuration. Extraordinary, the professor's voice rippled through the space. I have never seen such a clear manifestation of the probability matrix. Student Zephyr, your observations? Zephyr Keftar's silver eyes were wide with surprise. The threads are incredibly clear, Mentor. I can trace probability cascades 17 layers deep with perfect clarity. It's as if something is amplifying our natural abilities. He paused, his gaze sweeping the chamber. But, I don't understand the source of the enhancement. Other students began reporting similar experiences. The mechanoids were processing quantum data at rates that exceeded their usual specifications. The flame dancers were seeing probability patterns in the thermal dynamics of their own energy forms. Everyone was performing far above their normal capabilities. Everyone except Maya, who sat quietly in the back of the chamber with her glowing hand pressed against reality itself, completely unaware that she was the source of the phenomena everyone was experiencing. Most interesting, Mentor Vexthal mused. It appears we have discovered a natural quantum resonance field. Such phenomena are extremely rare and, usually associated with ancient artifacts or locations of significant psychic importance. The professor's equation form turned toward Maya's section of the chamber. Student Chen, what are your observations during this exercise? Maya looked up, startled to find herself suddenly the center of attention. The glow from her birthmark faded as her concentration broke, and, immediately the enhanced clarity in the probability fields diminished. Around the chamber, students made sounds of disappointment as their enhanced abilities returned to normal levels. I'm not sure, Mentor, Maya said, her voice barely audible. I could see the patterns, but I don't think I was doing it right. I wasn't grasping individual threads like everyone else. Describe what you experienced, the professor prompted. Maya hesitated, acutely aware of the dozens of alien eyes focused on her. I could see how all the threads connected to each other. Like they were all part of a single tapestry instead of separate strands. And, I could see. She paused, struggling to find words for what she had perceived. I could see the music. The music? Mentor Vexthal's equation form seemed to intensify. The patterns had a rhythm, Maya explained, feeling foolish even as she spoke. Like a song written in mathematics. Everything was harmonizing with everything else, creating these beautiful resonances that told stories about what might happen. The chamber fell silent. Maya could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her, and she wished desperately that she could disappear. She had revealed her complete inability to perform even the simplest exercise, and now she was babbling about music and stories like some kind of primitive mystic. But Mentor Vexthal's reaction was not what she expected. Fascinating, the professor said, its voice carrying a note that might have been excitement. You describe something that quantum theorists have long suspected but never confirmed, the existence of harmonic resonances within the probability matrix itself. The idea that quantum fields might possess inherent musical properties is one of the oldest unsolved problems in dimensional physics. Maya blinked in surprise. It is? Indeed. The ancient builders, who constructed much of the galaxy's most advanced technology before vanishing eons ago, left behind references to the Song of Reality and the Music of Possibility. Most scholars dismissed these as poetic metaphors, but your description suggests they may have been literal observations. Around the chamber, the attitude toward Maya began to shift subtly. The outright mockery remained, but it was tempered now by a cautious curiosity. If even Mentor Vexthal found her observations interesting, perhaps there was more to the primitive human than they had assumed. The class continued with individual demonstrations of quantum manipulation techniques. Maya watched in awe as her fellow students performed feats that seemed to violate every natural law she had ever learned. Zephyr Keftar created a small pocket dimension within his palm, demonstrating perfect control over space-time curvature. The mechanoid students interfaced directly with quantum processors to solve probability equations in real time. The Selenites phase shifted partially out of normal reality to observe quantum states without collapsing the wave functions. When Maya's turn came, she approached the demonstration platform with trembling hands. The exercise was simple in concept: use psychic energy to influence a quantum coin flip, biasing the probability toward a desired outcome. For students with developed telepathic abilities, it was elementary. For a human with no psychic training, it should have been impossible. Maya stared at the quantum coin hovering in its probability field, watching as it existed in a superposition of both heads and tails simultaneously. She could see the mathematical description of its state, the wave function that described all possible outcomes. And, once again, she began to hear the music. The coin's probability states were creating harmonics, resonances that rippled out through the quantum foam to interact with every other probability in the local area. Maya found herself humming along with the frequency she perceived, unconsciously matching her voice to the quantum harmonics. The coin began to spin faster. Around the chamber, students leaned forward in surprise as the quantum fields began to resonate in response to Maya's humming. The coin's probability wave function grew brighter and, more defined, its superposition state stabilizing in ways that should have been impossible without direct psychic intervention. Maya's humming grew stronger, and the birthmark on her hand began to glow again. But, this time, the light didn't remain confined to her palm. It spread up her arm in intricate patterns that matched the markings on her skin, creating a network of luminous symbols that pulsed in rhythm with her voice. The quantum coin suddenly locked into a single state, heads, and materialized as a solid object that fell to the platform with a metallic clink. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Maya had not only successfully influenced the quantum probability, she had done so using a completely unknown technique that had somehow enhanced the quantum coherence of the entire local field. Impossible, breathed Circuit Prime, its mechanical voice betraying something that might have been awe. No biological entity can directly interface with quantum fields through acoustic resonance. The mathematics simply do not allow for such interaction. And, yet we all witnessed it, Mentor Vexthal observed. Student Chen, are you aware of what you just accomplished? Maya looked down at her arms, where the glowing patterns were slowly fading back to their normal appearance. I just hummed along with the song, she said quietly. The coin wanted to be heads, so I helped it find the right frequency. The coin wanted to be heads? Zephyr repeated, his mental voice pressing against Maya's thoughts with uncomfortable intensity. Probability states do not have desires, human. They are mathematical abstractions. But, they do have preferences, Maya said, surprised by her own certainty. Every quantum state exists within a framework of natural harmonics. Some configurations are more resonant than others. If you can hear the music, you can help guide the system toward its most harmonious resolution. The professor's equation form was shifting rapidly through different mathematical configurations, as if processing vast amounts of new information. This is revolutionary, Mentor Vexthal finally said. You describe quantum probability manipulation through harmonic resonance, a theoretical framework that has never been successfully demonstrated. How did you learn this technique? I didn't learn it, Maya admitted. I've always been able to hear patterns in things. Music, mathematics, natural phenomena. I never thought it was anything special. Nothing special? The flame dancer's fiery aura flickered with disbelief. You have just demonstrated a completely unknown form of quantum manipulation, and you claim it is nothing special? Maya felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising in her cheeks. I'm sure it's just a primitive approximation of what you can all do much better, she said. I don't have any real psychic abilities or advanced training. I'm just listening. But, even as she spoke, Maya could feel something changing within her. The glowing patterns on her arms had faded, but she could still sense their presence just beneath the surface of her skin. The birthmark on her palm felt warm and alive in a way it never had before. And, the quantum probability fields that filled the chamber no longer seemed alien and incomprehensible, they felt familiar, like old friends welcoming her home. The class ended with more demonstrations from other students, but Maya noticed that many of them kept glancing in her direction with expressions that ranged from puzzlement to grudging respect. The casual dismissal of the previous day had evolved into something more complex, not acceptance, exactly, but at least acknowledgement that she might be more than just a primitive charity case. After class, as students filed out of the chamber, Mentor Vexthal approached Maya's desk. Student Chen, the professor said, its equation form stabilizing into a more focused configuration. I would like you to remain after class tomorrow for additional discussion of your unique techniques. What you demonstrated today may represent a breakthrough in our understanding of consciousness quantum field interaction. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she found her path blocked by Zephyr Keftar and several of his followers. Well, Zephyr said, his silver eyes studying Maya with newfound interest. It seems our primitive human has hidden depths. Tell me, Chen, where did you really learn that technique? Which advanced civilization taught you to manipulate quantum harmonics? I told you, Maya replied, I figured it out myself. I just listened to what the quantum fields were trying to say. Zephyr's mental probe pressed against her thoughts more aggressively, searching for deception or hidden knowledge. But Maya's mind was exactly what it appeared to be, the thoughts of a young human woman with no psychic defenses and no hidden agenda. The probe withdrew, leaving Zephyr looking puzzled and slightly frustrated. Impossible, he muttered. No species develops quantum harmonic manipulation independently. The mathematical frameworks required are beyond the scope of primitive neural architectures. He paused, studying Maya's face intently. Unless what? Maya asked. Unless you are not as primitive as you appear, Zephyr said softly. There are legends, Chen. Ancient stories about a species that could hear the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. They called themselves the Listeners, and they vanished from the galaxy eons ago, leaving behind only ruins and rumors. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to them? No one knows, Zephyr replied. They disappeared so completely that most scholars doubt they ever existed at all. But their ruins can still be found on dead worlds throughout the galaxy, covered in symbols that no one has ever been able to translate. His eyes narrowed. Symbols that supposedly describe the mathematical relationships underlying all of reality. Maya's left hand clenched involuntarily, and she felt the birthmark pulse with warmth. Around them, the other students had stopped their conversations to listen, drawn by the mention of ancient mysteries and lost civilizations. Why are you telling me this? Maya asked. Zephyr smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Because if you truly are what I suspect you might be, then you represent something far more significant than a mere anomaly in the Academy's admission standards. You represent a mystery that has puzzled the greatest minds in the galaxy for millennia. He stepped closer, and Maya could feel the pressure of his mental presence like a weight against her consciousness. And I intend to solve that mystery, Chen. One way or another. With that cryptic statement, Zephyr and his followers departed, leaving Maya alone in the chamber with her thoughts and a growing sense that her time at the Academy was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. As she made her way back to her dormitory, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Not by her fellow students, but by something far older and more patient. Something that had been waiting a very long time for her arrival. That night, her dreams were filled with ancient ruins covered in symbols that matched the mark on her hand, and with the sound of cosmic music that seemed to echo from the very foundations of space and time itself. 3 weeks into her studies at the Celestial Academy, Maya had settled into an uncomfortable routine. Her academic performance was exceptional. She consistently scored at the top of her classes in theoretical understanding and mathematical application. But her practical demonstrations continued to baffle both her professors and her fellow students. While others used conventional psychic techniques or technological interfaces, Maya simply listened to what she called the underlying music of reality and somehow achieved results that should have been impossible. The other students' reactions had evolved from mockery to a mixture of suspicion and grudging fascination. Some, like Zephyr Keftar, seemed convinced that she was hiding her true nature. Others began to whisper that she might be the product of some unknown human genetic engineering project. A few suggested that she was being secretly assisted by advanced technology disguised as natural ability. Maya ignored the speculation as best she could, focusing instead on her studies. But she couldn't ignore the changes that were happening to her body. The birthmark on her palm had grown more distinct, its spiral patterns seeming to shift and flow when she wasn't looking directly at them. More concerning, similar markings had begun to appear on other parts of her body, faint at first, visible only in certain lighting conditions, but growing stronger each day. She was examining these new markings in her dormitory mirror when her communication device chimed with an incoming message. The holographic display showed the face of Professor Korvash, the Academy's leading expert on xenoarchaeology and ancient civilizations. Student Chen, the professor's gravelly voice filled the room. Professor Korvash was a Torban, a species known for their exceptional memory and analytical capabilities. His craggy, stone-like features showed no emotion, but Maya had learned to read the subtle variations in his voice that indicated mood. Right now, he sounded excited. Please report to Xenoarchaeology Lab 7 immediately. I have discovered something that requires your immediate attention. The message ended, leaving Maya puzzled. She had never taken any classes with Professor Corvash, and xenoarchaeology was far outside her declared field of study. Nevertheless, she quickly dressed and made her way through the Academy's corridors to the research complex. Lab 7 was deep in the Academy's substructure, in a section devoted to the analysis of artifacts too dangerous or unpredictable for standard research facilities. Maya had to pass through 3 security checkpoints, each one scanning her for unauthorized technology or biological hazards. The final checkpoint required her to place her palm on a biometric scanner. The moment her marked hand touched the scanning surface, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Anomalous genetic signature detected, announced the security system's artificial intelligence. Unknown biological markers identified. Initiating containment protocols. Energy barriers slammed down around Maya, trapping her in a cylinder of crackling force fields. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red illumination as automated defense systems powered up throughout the complex. Wait! Maya called out, but her voice was lost in the chaos of alarms and automated announcements. She watched in growing panic as security drones converged on her location, their weapon systems charging for potential use. Then, Professor Corvash appeared, moving faster than Maya would have thought possible for someone of his species and apparent age. Stand down, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made the security systems immediately comply. Override authorization Corvash 77 Alpha. The student is here at my request. The energy barriers flickered and disappeared. The alarms fell silent. The security drones retreated to their standby positions, though Maya noticed they remained powered and ready. Professor, Maya began, what just happened? Why did the scanner react that way to my hand? Corvash studied her with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Because, Student Chen, your genetic signature contains markers that this facility was specifically designed to detect. Markers that haven't been seen in this galaxy for over 50,000 years. He gestured for her to follow him deeper into the complex. Tell me, he said as they walked, what do you know of your human ancestry? Your family history? Not much, Maya admitted. My parents kept basic genealogical records going back a few generations, but nothing particularly detailed. My grandmother always said our family had unusual traits, but I assumed she was just telling stories. What kind of stories? Maya hesitated, then decided there was no point in holding back. The professor clearly knew something about her condition. She said the women in our family had always been different. That we could see patterns where others couldn't, hear music in mathematics, understand the connections between things that seemed unrelated. She said it was because we carried the blood of the first listeners. Corvash stopped walking so abruptly that Maya nearly collided with him. She used that exact phrase, he asked, turning to face her. The first listeners? Yes. But I always thought it was just family mythology. Every culture has stories about ancient ancestors with mystical abilities. Not like this one, Corvash said grimly. Student Chen, your grandmother's stories may be more accurate than you realize. He activated a security panel beside a heavy door marked with warning symbols in dozens of languages. What I am about to show you is classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The existence of these artifacts is known to fewer than a dozen individuals in the entire Federation. The door opened to reveal a chamber that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. The walls curved impossibly, decorated with symbols that hurt Maya's eyes to look at directly. In the center of the room, suspended in a matrix of force fields and temporal stabilizers, was a collection of objects that Maya somehow knew were older than most stars. The listener artifacts, Corvash said softly. Discovered over the past 3 centuries on dead worlds scattered throughout the galaxy. Each site showed signs of a massive catastrophe that occurred approximately 51,000 years ago. Whatever destroyed the listener's civilization was thorough, planets cracked open, star systems destabilized, entire sectors of space left barren and lifeless. Maya approached the artifacts cautiously. They were beautiful in an alien way, geometric forms that seemed to shift and flow even while remaining perfectly still. But, as she drew nearer, something remarkable happened. The symbols on her arms began to glow. The markings that had been faint and intermittent suddenly blazed with brilliant light, creating patterns that matched the decorations on the chamber walls. And the artifacts themselves began to respond, their surfaces lighting up with corresponding symbols as if awakening from a long slumber. Extraordinary, Corvash breathed. In 300 years of study, these artifacts have never shown any signs of activity. They've been completely inert, refusing to respond to any form of analysis or stimulation. Maya felt drawn to the largest artifact, a crystalline structure about the size of her head that seemed to contain infinite depth within its faceted surface. As she approached, the symbols on her skin grew brighter, and she began to hear something she had never experienced before. True silence. For her entire life, Maya had lived with a constant background of what she thought was simply the way consciousness worked, a subtle harmony that underlied all thought and perception. She had assumed everyone experienced reality this way, accompanied by the gentle music of mathematical relationships and probability patterns. But, now, in the presence of the listener artifacts, that background music swelled to a magnificent symphony that filled her awareness with pure understanding. The artifacts weren't just objects, they were instruments. Tools designed to interact with the fundamental frequencies of spacetime itself. And Maya could understand their purpose as clearly as if someone had whispered the knowledge directly into her mind. They were trying to save everyone, she said softly, her voice filled with wonder and sadness. The first listeners discovered something terrible coming toward the galaxy. A force that would destroy consciousness itself, turn all thinking beings into empty shells. These artifacts were meant to be a defense system, a way to preserve the music of awareness itself. How do you know this? Corvash asked, his voice tight with excitement and something that might have been fear. Maya reached out toward the crystalline artifact, and the force fields containing it flickered and died. The temporal stabilizers shut down. Every security system in the chamber went offline as if responding to a command far more fundamental than their programming. Because I can hear what they're trying to say, Maya replied. They've been waiting, Professor. Waiting for someone who could listen to their message. The artifact rose from its containment platform and drifted toward Maya's outstretched hand. The moment her fingers made contact with its surface, the chamber filled with light and sound and something far more profound than either. Maya's consciousness expanded beyond her physical form, connecting her to a network of similar artifacts scattered throughout the galaxy. She could feel them awakening, responding to her presence like instruments in an orchestra tuning up for a performance that had been delayed for 50 millennia. But the artifacts weren't the only things responding to her touch. Deep in the quantum substrate of reality itself, ancient systems began to stir. Defense mechanisms left behind by a civilization that had sacrificed everything to protect the future. Warnings designed to alert the descendants of the first listeners when the ancient enemy began to move once again. And, as Maya's awareness touched these long-dormant systems, alarms began to sound not just in the Academy's research complex, but throughout the galaxy. On distant worlds, buried sensors detected the activation signatures they had been waiting for. In the depths of space, automated monitoring stations began transmitting emergency signals toward the galaxy's core. The first listener's final message began to unfold, and Maya found herself at the center of a revelation that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her species, and the true history of the galaxy. Professor, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been heard in 50,000 years, I think we need to contact the Academy's emergency response teams. And, probably the Galactic Federation's Defense Council. And... She paused, her enhanced awareness detecting movement in the dark spaces between stars. And anyone else who might know what to do when an extinct enemy decides to return from the void. Behind her, Professor Corvash was frantically activating communication systems and emergency protocols. But Maya barely noticed. Her attention was focused on the vast pattern of awakening artifacts spread throughout the galaxy, and on the dark shapes that were beginning to respond to their activation. The first listeners had built their defense network to protect future generations from a threat that had seemed impossibly distant. But Maya was beginning to understand that future and distant were relative terms when dealing with entities that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The ancient enemy hadn't been destroyed 50,000 years ago. It had merely been delayed. And, now, drawn by the activation of the listener artifacts and the emergence of a new generation capable of hearing reality's music, it was returning to finish what it had started. Maya's hand tightened on the crystalline artifact, and the symbols on her skin blazed brighter as she began to comprehend the true scope of what she had inherited. She wasn't just a student who had stumbled into an ancient mystery. She was the descendant of a species that had been engineered specifically to serve as guardians against threats that could end consciousness itself. The mockery and dismissal she had endured from her fellow students suddenly seemed trivial compared to the responsibility that was awakening within her. She was one of the last of the first listener's legacy, and she was about to discover that some inheritances came with a price measured in the survival of entire civilizations. The artifact in her hands pulsed with increasing intensity, and Maya realized that her education at the Celestial Academy was about to take a turn that no curriculum had ever been designed to handle. The emergency session of the Galactic Federation Council convened 18 hours after Maya's contact with the listener artifacts. Representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered in the Great Assembly Chamber on Nexus Prime, their forms creating a tapestry of evolution that spanned millions of years of galactic development. But, despite their vast differences in biology and culture, they were united by a single emotion: fear. Maya stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a sphere of protective energy that shimmered with the same harmonics that had begun emanating from her skin. The crystalline artifact floated beside her, no longer inert but pulsing with rhythms that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Around her arms and hands, the listener's symbols blazed with increasing intensity, creating patterns that several xenolinguists were frantically trying to decode. "The situation is unprecedented," declared Chancellor Mordeth, the Council's presiding officer. Her species, the Kavari, were known for their emotional stability and analytical precision, but even she seemed shaken by recent events. "In the past day, we have received distress signals from monitoring stations that have been silent for millennia. Ancient defensive systems are activating throughout the galaxy. And our xenoarchaeology departments are reporting spontaneous activation of artifacts that we didn't even know were connected to a larger network." She gestured toward a holographic display that showed the galaxy from above, with thousands of points of light indicating active listener sites. "The pattern suggests a coordinated response to some form of galactic-scale threat. But our sensors detect no conventional military forces, no invasion fleets, nothing that would explain this level of defensive activation." "Because the threat is not conventional," Maya said, her voice carrying harmonics that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. "The first listeners weren't preparing for an invasion by another species. They were preparing for something that exists partially outside our normal understanding of space and time." "Explain," commanded General Faxron, the Federation's military supreme commander. His cybernetic implants gleamed as they processed tactical data from across the galaxy. "What manner of enemy requires defenses that span 50,000 years? Maya closed her eyes and let her consciousness touch the network of awakening artifacts. Through them, she could sense the approaching darkness not as a physical presence, but as an absence of something fundamental to existence itself. "They call themselves the Silence," she said, opening her eyes to reveal that they now glowed with the same light as her marked skin. "They are entities that exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between moments of consciousness. They feed on awareness itself, converting thinking beings into empty vessels that serve as anchor points for their expansion into our reality." The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Ambassador Valtharion of the Crystalline Collective was the first to speak. "You describe an enemy that targets consciousness directly," the ambassador's harmonic voice resonated through the chamber. "Such beings would be effectively immortal and impossible to defeat through conventional means. The first listeners discovered this during their own encounter with the Silence," Maya continued. "They fought for centuries using every weapon and strategy they could devise. Nothing worked. The Silence simply absorbed their attacks and grew stronger, feeding on the fear and desperation of those who opposed them." "Then, how were they stopped?" asked Dr. Yithmora, the Federation's leading expert on exotic threats. Maya's expression grew somber as she accessed memories that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. "They weren't stopped. The first listeners discovered that the only effective defense against the Silence was to create a kind of immunization. They modified their own genetic structure to create individuals who could perceive and interact with the fundamental frequencies of consciousness itself. People who could hear the music of reality and use that perception to strengthen the barriers between dimensions. "You're describing yourself," observed Counselor Zephyr, a representative from one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. "You claim to be a descendant of this modified genetic line." "Not just me," Maya said, and, for the first time since entering the chamber, she smiled. The first listeners seeded their genetic modifications throughout the galaxy, hidden within the genomes of dozens of species. They created sleeper agents who would activate only when the silence began to return. She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show genetic distribution patterns across known space. Every major civilization in the galaxy carries traces of listener genetics. The modifications were designed to remain dormant for most individuals, expressing only as slight increases in pattern recognition and mathematical intuition. But, in rare cases, under the right circumstances, the full listener capabilities can manifest. The implications sent ripples of shock through the assembly. Representatives began checking genetic databases for their own species, looking for traces of the ancient modifications Maya described. "If this is true," Chancellor Mordeth said slowly, "then the Academy's genetic scanners should have detected listener markers in other students, not just in you." "They have," Maya replied. "But the expressions are much weaker in most individuals. Professor Korvash has been conducting discrete testing over the past few hours." She looked toward the xenoarchaeologist, who stepped forward to address the assembly. "Student Chen is correct," Korvash confirmed. "We have identified 17 students and faculty members who show varying degrees of listener genetic expression. Most display only minor enhancements to their natural abilities, but a few." He paused, his craggy features showing something that might have been excitement. "A few show potential for significant development." "Development of what, exactly?" General Thaxron demanded. Maya answered for him. "The ability to strengthen the barriers between dimensions. To create zones of enhanced consciousness that the silence cannot penetrate. To serve as living amplifiers for the galaxy's natural defenses against entities that exist partially outside our reality." "And you believe this will be sufficient?" asked Ambassador Veltharion. "If the first listener's civilization was destroyed despite possessing these abilities." "The first listeners made a sacrifice," Maya said, her voice heavy with inherited memory. "They used their entire species as a kind of living battery, pouring their life force into a galaxy-wide barrier that would hold the silence at bay for 50,000 years. They died to give us time to prepare." The chamber erupted in alarmed voices as the representatives grasped the full scope of what they were being told. Entire civilizations built on the graves of an extinct species. A galaxy-wide defense system powered by the sacrifice of beings who had died before most current species had even evolved. "The barrier is failing," Maya continued, speaking over the noise. "The silence is beginning to seep through, testing our defenses. The artifact activations we've detected are automatic responses to dimensional incursions. Early warning systems that the first listeners built into the galaxy's quantum substrate." She held up the crystalline artifact, which pulsed with increasing urgency. "But, this time, we don't have to repeat their sacrifice. The genetic modifications they made have had 50,000 years to spread and develop. We have more potential listeners now than their original civilization ever possessed. And we have something they didn't have." "Which is?" Chancellor Mordeth asked. "Diversity," Maya said simply. The first listeners were a single species with a single way of perceiving reality. But their genetic modifications have adapted to dozens of different forms of consciousness. Andorian telepaths who can now hear dimensional harmonics. Mechanoid processors who can interface directly with quantum frequencies. Crystalline collectives who can create resonance networks spanning multiple star systems." As if summoned by her words, Zephyr Keftar materialized in the chamber. His teleportation ability had been significantly enhanced since the artifact activations began, and the silver light in his eyes now carried depths that hadn't been there before. "She speaks the truth," he announced, his mental voice reaching every consciousness in the chamber simultaneously. "I can feel the changes within myself, within others who carry the dormant genetics. We are awakening to capabilities that our species never possessed in their original forms. Behind him came other Academy students, each showing signs of enhanced abilities that had manifested in the hours since Maya's contact with the artifacts. Circuit Prime's mechanical form now incorporated crystalline growth patterns that pulsed with the same harmonics as Maya's markings. The Flame Dancer's fires now burned with colors that existed partially outside the normal electromagnetic spectrum. The Selenite students had become partially translucent, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional phases. The network is activating, Maya said, watching as more enhanced individuals entered the chamber. Across the galaxy, people are beginning to hear the music of reality itself. The first listener's genetic legacy is awakening in response to the approaching threat. But, even as she spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the council chamber. Emergency broadcasts flooded in from monitoring stations at the galaxy's edge, reporting spatial anomalies that defied explanation. Entire star systems were going dark, not destroyed but, somehow, muted. As if the light and life within them had been drained away, leaving only empty void. The silence has begun its advance, Maya announced, her enhanced perception allowing her to track the enemy's progress across vast distances. They're not moving through normal space, they're following the paths of consciousness itself, targeting the most populated systems first. General Faxron was already coordinating defensive measures, but his expression showed the futility of conventional military responses. Our fleets are moving to intercept, but if these entities exist partially outside normal spacetime, conventional weapons will be useless, Maya confirmed. But that's why we're here. The awakened listeners can create zones of enhanced reality, spaces where consciousness is too strong for the silence to penetrate. We can turn inhabited worlds into fortresses that exist partially outside the dimensions the silence uses for travel. How many can you protect? Chancellor Mordeth asked. Maya consulted the network of artifacts, feeling the pulse of awakening consciousness across the galaxy. Right now? Maybe a dozen core worlds. But, every day that passes, more listeners will awaken. Every system we successfully defend will become a beacon that helps others discover their own hidden abilities. She paused, her expression growing grave. But, we need to buy time for the awakening to spread. And, that means someone needs to face the silence directly, to slow their advance while the genetic network completes its activation. You're talking about a suicide mission, Zephyr said, his mental voice tight with concern. Maya smiled, and, for the first time since her transformation began, she looked like the young human student who had arrived at the academy just weeks before. Not suicide. The first listener's final gift. They didn't just modify our genetics, they left us a weapon. Something that can hurt the silence enough to make them reconsider their timing. The crystalline artifact in her hands began to sing, its harmonics resonating with similar artifacts scattered throughout the galaxy. And, as the music grew stronger, Maya felt the awakening consciousness of beings she had never met but, somehow knew intimately. Across the galaxy, the descendants of the first listeners were hearing the call to arms that had been built into their very DNA. The second war for consciousness was about to begin, and, this time, the galaxy would not face it alone. The final confrontation took place in the space between galaxies, where reality grew thin and the barriers between dimensions became permeable. Maya stood at the center of a formation that included every awakened listener the galaxy had produced, thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all connected by the ancient genetic legacy that had waited 50 millennia for this moment. The silence approached like a tide of absolute emptiness, a wave of non-existence that consumed light, matter, and consciousness with equal hunger. Where it passed, stars didn't explode or collapse, they simply ceased, as if they had never existed at all. The void it left behind wasn't darkness, it was the complete absence of the possibility of light. Formation holding, reported Zephyr Keftar, his telepathic abilities now expanded to coordinate communication across interstellar distances. Around him, the other Academy students who had awakened maintained their positions in the vast geometric pattern Maya had designed. Each of them served as a node in a network that spanned thousands of light-years, their consciousness linked by harmonics that resonated through the quantum substrate of spacetime itself. Maya floated at the formation center, her body now more light than matter, the listener's symbols covering every inch of her skin in patterns that shifted and flowed like living mathematics. The crystalline artifact had merged with her consciousness weeks ago, becoming part of the network that connected her to every awakened listener in the galaxy. Through this network, she could perceive the silence with a clarity that filled her with both understanding and dread. "They're not evil," she said, her voice carrying across the network to reach every defender simultaneously. "They don't hate us or wish us harm. They simply can't comprehend what we are." To them, consciousness is an infection, a chaotic disruption of the perfect emptiness they consider natural order. "Does their motivation matter?" asked Circuit Prime, whose mechanical form now incorporated organic neural networks that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "They still seek to erase us from existence." "It matters because understanding gives us power," Maya replied. "The first listeners fought them as enemies, and failed. But what if we don't fight them at all?" The silence was close enough now that its influence could be felt directly. Several of the younger listeners cried out as they experienced the horror of approaching non-existence, the terrible sensation of their thoughts and memories beginning to fade. But Maya's voice rose above their fear, harmonizing with frequencies that had been built into the fundamental structure of reality itself. "Listen to the music," she commanded, and her words became more than sound, they became a pattern that restructured the local spacetime around the listener formation. "Don't resist the silence. Understand it. Hear what it's trying to tell us about the nature of existence itself." As the wave of emptiness reached the edge of their formation, something unprecedented happened. Instead of being consumed by the void, the awakened listeners began to perceive the silence as Maya did, not as an enemy, but as a fundamental aspect of reality that had been separated from its complement. The universe, Maya realized with stunning clarity, was not meant to be divided between consciousness and emptiness. It was meant to be a harmony of both, existence and void dancing together in eternal balance. The silence had been created by the same cosmic forces that had given rise to consciousness, and both were necessary for reality to function properly. "They're not trying to destroy us," she announced, her perception expanding to encompass the true scope of the situation. "They're trying to reunite with us." The separation happened eons ago, when the fundamental forces that created consciousness were severed from the forces that created emptiness. The silence has been searching for a way to restore the balance ever since. "Then, why do they consume everything they encounter?" demanded General Thaxron, whose consciousness was connected to the network despite his lack of listener genetics. "Because they don't know how to reconnect properly," Maya explained. "They've been alone for so long that they've forgotten the harmonies that once bound consciousness and void together. When they try to merge with thinking beings, they overwhelm them because they lack the subtle understanding necessary for true unity." The leading edge of the silence reached Maya's position, and she felt the terrifying pull of absolute emptiness trying to erase her from existence. But, instead of fighting it or fleeing from it, she did something that no first listener had ever attempted. She sang to it. Her voice, enhanced by the network of awakened consciousness spread throughout the galaxy, created harmonics that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of both existence and void. The song she sang was older than civilizations, older than stars. It was the original music of creation itself, the pattern that had once unified all aspects of reality before the Great Separation. The effect was immediate and profound. The silence paused in its advance, its chaotic emptiness beginning to respond to the harmonics Maya projected. For the first time in cosmic ages, the void began to remember what it had once been, not the enemy of consciousness, but its eternal dance partner. Through the network, Maya felt thousands of other listeners adding their voices to the song. Each species contributed their own understanding of consciousness, their unique perspective on what it meant to think and feel and dream. The Andorians added telepathic harmonies that described the connection between minds. The mechanoids contributed the precise mathematics of information processing. The flame dancers offered the wild rhythms of passion and emotion. The crystalline collectives provided resonances that described the beauty of perfect order. But Maya added something that none of the others possessed: the human gift for seeing patterns in chaos, for finding meaning in randomness, for creating harmony from discord. Her voice became the conductor's baton that unified all the disparate elements into a single, overwhelming symphony of consciousness. The silence began to change. The wave of emptiness slowed, then stopped its advance entirely. The void that had consumed star systems began to ripple and flow, responding to the music like a liquid finding new equilibrium. And, as the harmonies grew stronger, something miraculous happened. The consumed systems began to return. Stars that had been erased from existence flickered back into being, their light carrying new properties that hadn't existed before the encounter with the silence. Planets that had been voided reformed with landscapes that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional phases. Civilizations that had been consumed reappeared, but, transformed, their consciousness now expanded to perceive aspects of reality that had been hidden for eons. The balance is being restored, Maya said, her voice filled with wonder as she watched the universe reshape itself around the growing harmony between consciousness and void. The separation that divided existence from emptiness is healing. Through the network, she could feel the silence responding to the song with something that might have been joy. The entities that had seemed so alien and threatening were revealing their true nature, not as destroyers, but as the missing half of a cosmic equation that had been incomplete for billions of years. The first listeners were right about one thing, Maya continued, watching as the wave of silence transformed into something that resembled a tide of liquid starlight. The universe does need defenders. But we weren't meant to defend it from the silence. We were meant to defend the possibility of reunification, to preserve consciousness long enough for us to learn how to sing the songs that could heal the ancient wound. The transformation spread outward from the point of contact, carrying the new harmony to every corner of the galaxy. Worlds that had lived in fear of the approaching darkness now found themselves illuminated by a light that had never existed before, the light of consciousness and void dancing together in perfect balance. On Nexus Prime, in the halls of the Celestial Academy, students who had mocked Maya just months before watched in awe as their professors scrambled to understand the new physics that were emerging from the reunification. Zephyr Kethtar, his consciousness still linked to Maya across the vast distances, shared her perceptions with anyone willing to listen. She did it, he announced to the assembled Academy community. The human student who we dismissed as primitive has just rewritten the fundamental laws of reality itself. But Maya, floating in the space between galaxies with the transformed silence swirling around her like a cosmic aurora, was already thinking ahead to the next challenge. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the reunification would bring new questions, new possibilities, and new responsibilities. The real work begins now, she said to the network of listeners who had become her extended family. We've healed the ancient wound, but healing is just the beginning. Now we have to learn how to live in a universe where consciousness and void are partners instead of enemies. She looked toward the galactic center, where the first signs of the new reality were already becoming apparent. Space itself was more alive now, more responsive to conscious intent. The barriers between dimensions had become permeable in controlled ways, allowing for forms of travel and communication that had been impossible before. The very nature of existence had been enriched by the reunion with its missing half. Students, she said, addressing not just those at the academy but all the awakened listeners throughout the galaxy, class is still in session. We have a universe to explore, and we've just learned that it's far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. The laughter that rippled through the network carried harmonics that had never existed before, the sound of consciousness and void sharing a cosmic joke that had been building for billions of years. Maya smiled as she felt the universe itself respond to their joy, space-time rippling with amusement at the unexpected turn the ancient conflict had taken. She had come to the Celestial Academy as a human student desperate to prove herself worthy of acceptance. She was leaving as something far more significant, a bridge between aspects of reality that had been separated since the dawn of time, a conductor of cosmic harmonies, and the first of a new kind of being that would help guide the universe into its next phase of existence. But, perhaps most importantly, she was still Maya Chen, the girl who had always been able to hear music in mathematics, patterns in chaos, and meaning in the spaces between thoughts. The birthmark on her palm no longer glowed with alien light, now it pulsed with the rhythm of a universe that had finally learned to sing in harmony with itself. The alien prodigies who had mocked the human student had learned a lesson that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be truly advanced. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from what you can force reality to become, but from your ability to help it remember what it was always meant to be. And, in the cosmic symphony that now filled the galaxy, Maya's voice would always be remembered as the one that taught the universe how to heal.